Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Travis Grew. Happy to see Michael Munger here, out of quarantine. So happy about that. Thank you all for coming. This is going to be a special night. I know it's kind of hard to get out on a Wednesday night and break your routine a little bit, but I really appreciate you coming out, and so does everyone on the executive committee. Glad to see John Underwood here. Just have a couple announcements real quick. This Saturday, we have a charity event. We have the food bank in Durham from 9 to 11. And if you're interested in volunteering, see Patrick over here. We've been doing work with them for a long time. Every couple months, we go over there and help them bag groceries or bag Thanksgiving bags that they give out, or just whatever they need done, we do it. So we're doing that this Saturday. And then Patrick has an idea that if you're interested, I was going to have him come announce an event that we may have coming up, a kind of a social event, if you want to do that right now. All right.
July 31st, there's a baseball team in Holly Springs, the Holly Springs Salamanders, and we will have an opportunity to go as long as we get 10 people. All you can eat baseball tickets for $18. We get our name on the scoreboard, and you're allowed to tailgate in the parking lot prior to the game. So if anybody's interested coming to the baseball game, come see me. We'll get you signed up, and it's Saturday, July 31st. It's an evening game, so we'll be under the canopy if it's too hot. So no worries about getting sunburned or anything like that. But come see me if you're interested.
Thank you so much. It should be really fun. That's all I have, other than we're here every Wednesday. If you ever want to stop by, we're usually on the other side. We only come over here for special events. So I see some new faces here. You're always welcome to come, always welcome to come hang out and talk and get to know some of the folks in this county. And election season is coming up. So also, if you're interested in running for office, come see myself or Brad over here in the pink shirt. And we're looking to have a really good 2022 cycle. So with that said, we have a very special guest this evening from the John Locke Foundation. His name is Jon Sanders, and he will be talking to us about nuclear power and electricity, something that I am very interested in, but very not knowledgeable on. And as of right now, I lean kind of towards being pro-nuclear, but I would love to know the pros and cons of both and why it's become so politicized and why there's a debate back and forth. And I know there's some new legislation coming about soon, and we'd love to hear about that. So with that being said, I want everyone to welcome Jon Sanders and give him a round of applause. And thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you coming, man. It's all yours, man. We'll do a little bit of Q&A after this, so save your questions for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Patrick and Brad, for inviting me here, and Ken for running this. I'm really happy to be here. It actually freaked me out looking up, seeing myself next to the thing. So I'm not going to do that. And Mike Munger, also very good to see you. I hadn't seen you in a while. I think it would be more fun if you guys have some questions while I'm talking. Feel free to raise your hand or whatever. I don't know if that messes y'all up, but it might be easier to do to keep this thing kind of going. But my thesis is basically going to be that whatever your concern with electric generation, whether you're most interested in it being least cost or it being reliable or being zero emissions, to me, nuclear is the best source for that. And as for, why this is so political, it's because, it's odd to talk about this as someone who's an advocate for free markets, but there is no free market for electricity in North Carolina. You have no choice in who is your electricity provider. So the state of North Carolina decided, and like all the other states, that electricity provision is a natural monopoly. So they decided that the policy issue was to protect people from being taken advantage of by monopoly pricing. So the state decided that there was such an interest in public interest in the provision of electricity that they guaranteed a monopolist, and that monopolist would be guaranteed a rate of profit, and the state policy for the provision of electricity would be that it would be least cost and reliable as much as possible. So I feel like sometimes I'm arguing, in an environment that's in a government monopoly. As a free market advocate, I feel like I'm, arguing for how best to play basketball on the football field. But I think that least cost and reliable has to be the best standard given that parameter, and that's one of the reasons why I favor ongoing nuclear as a generation source. So stepping back, if we can move to, I think, the first slide, why it's so important is because energy is not just any consumer good. It's not just any old consumer good. It is one of the most critical consumer goods that we have. It's a critical aspect of life in the 21st century. And, it's a set price, which means, and because everybody needs it, it affects the poor most of all. Like everything in economics, basically, the poor are going to be affected the most, but this is something that everybody needs, everybody consumes. So anything that keeps electricity prices low benefits the poor more than it does proportionally others, and anything that increases it affects the poor proportionally more than it does others. But electricity is also an input into pretty much everything that's produced. So anything that increases the price of electricity, or that allows the price of electricity to be higher than it needs to be, means that that goods and services are going to be higher than they need to be. And conversely, if we can keep electricity prices low. So that is why I am very much in favor of keeping the least cost reliable standard in state policy. Let's see, move on to the next slide, I think. All right, that's not going to be visible at all, unfortunately. Okay, all right, that's a little bit better. This is from a study from a few years ago I thought was really fascinating. And basically, the researchers tried to account for how much labor will go into producing the same amount of light for an hour. So that's supposed to be, in 1750 BC, you would have to work 400 hours to produce the equivalent of a 100-watt light bulb for an hour. And that's because you'd have to go out and collect sticks or burn dung, or, it's not efficient. By 1800, it would be about 50 hours. And at this point in time, to get light, you are now burning candles, you are burning tallow or fat or whale oil. They're not great sources, but they're better than dung. So by now, it takes about a second to produce that amount, about a second of labor to get that equivalent. And that shows just how much the efficiency that we've seen throughout history in producing power has gone. And it also means that the labor that would have gone into powering your home, producing this electricity, getting that amount of light, now can be used for unimaginably great numbers of other productive resources. So I think it's the next slide. Let's see. Yeah, and that'll have to be blown up as well. I've always liked the environmental Kuznets curve. It's named after the Kuznets curve, which is by an economist, Simon Kuznets, from the 1950s, which was not originally speaking about the environment, but about the uses of capital. But several economists grasped onto the theory of that. And it's a really good way of explaining how things have gone with respect to emissions, which is one of the biggest issues that people have regarding electricity outside of cost and outside of monetary cost and reliability. So what this graph kind of explains is the development of human civilization. And before human civilization in any place, you're going to have zero man-made emissions. That just makes sense. The state of nature is no man. As a civilization grows, as people start to scrabble their way forward, trying to take care of themselves and their families and grow their communities, their main issues are creature comforts. Their main issues are finding something to eat, finding shelter, finding ways of heating and cooling their homes. And these are going to start out to be less efficient. And this is where a lot of third world countries are right now, where they are more, their focus is more on the creature comforts and growing their economy. And at some point in time, as these efficiencies grow, as people find new ways and then begin to be comfortable in their possessions and are no longer worried about their daily meals and about shelter for the night and about their daily heating and cooling, then there's a turning point and they start to, and also in the technological change of efficiency, they start to value things differently. Suddenly we can have a service economy where people are no longer involved in manufacturing and in industrial jobs as much. And so the service economy, where you're serving fellow people, where you are doing outside work that doesn't involve as much emissions. So these, eventually you start to see the pollution curve declining, and that's where we are in the United States and a lot of first world countries. So with regard to cost of electricity, as I said before, electricity not being a market good for consumers in North Carolina, we have no choice in our provision. So oh yeah, go ahead, please.
So isn't there a standard criticism of the environmental Kuznets curve that says that what that just is richer countries hiding their pollution by exporting it to poor countries? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, his question is, isn't there a standard criticism of the environmental Kuznets curve that richer countries are basically exporting their pollution to poor countries? There is that criticism, but I think the general principle is sound, because we're not exporting all pollution. It's not just a matter of accumulated trash pollution, but also efficiencies of, like, we're no longer burning candles. We are no longer always burning incandescent light bulbs. We now have light emitting devices. So it's those kind of efficiencies too, but that's a good point. So where I was going with the cost is, cost of electricity becomes a public policy matter. Many people have policy preferences or preferences of electricity generation, and I do, that it would be least cost, that it would be reliable. But there have been other costs that have been raised by people. For years, for example, there were concerns that particular sources of electricity generation had unseen costs of dangers to our national security. So, for example, in the 70s, there was worry about the fact that we were using oil, foreign oil, to power some of our power plants. And that led to an increased push for coal, because coal is a domestic and a very plentiful domestic resource. And especially in the latter decades, the environmental costs have become something that people have brought to the fore, and there have been concerns about the emissions from different sources, and different sources have different levels of emissions, of course, as everybody knows. Coal being the most polluting of the major sources. Natural gas, not quite so much. Of the fossil fuels, nuclear is a zero emissions source, but so are renewable sources like solar and wind and hydroelectric. Maybe the next slide, I can't remember what I've got there for it. Oh, yeah, now go back that one. All right, so, but it's a political issue. And so our governor has a clean power plan, the clean energy plan that he put together, originally instituted from an executive order, surprise, surprise. But he had what they call the stakeholder process, where he involved over 160 different organizations, mostly environmental, but some of them community-based organizations that helped him develop his plan. And the thrust of the plan is that he wants to reduce carbon dioxide emissions 70% by 2030, with 2005 being the target year, the start year. But this is a clip from the original document where the stakeholders listed their priorities. Their priorities are a little bit different from the state least cost reliable standard. Their main priority, as you can see, 20%, their top priority was environmental protection and reduction of emissions. And so with cost and reliability not being as important to them, it should not be surprising that under the plan as put forward in a recent study by my organization, the John Locke Foundation, looked at, all right, first of all, let me back up 1 second, sorry. Duke Energy has produced several different plans that they would use to, several different approaches that they propose to address what the governor has put forward in the clean energy plan. The one that's closest to the governor's plan, according to the research that was done from my office by a researcher named Jordan McGillis, what the closest one would raise, according to his estimates, your power bills, a typical household's power bills, by $400 a year. So that's like over $33 a month. My concern with that is that, and it's hard to imagine, I think, for everyone in this room, people who are wealthy enough where $33 a month would definitely be a pain, but it wouldn't be a hardship as it is for some people. Consider Japan after the Fukushima, which is one of the big things that people who are concerned about nuclear power would bring up is the Fukushima Daiichi disaster. Well, Japan kind of went overboard on the precautionary principle. They had 54 nuclear power plants and they closed all of them. Not just, there was a dozen or so that would be similarly situated as Fukushima. And prior to that, Japan was very similar to North Carolina in that we had very similar amounts of nuclear generation in their power plant. So 30% for them, for us, it's 32%. So they went straight to zero and replaced it with other sources of generation. And within 3 years, their electricity rates had gone up by 38%. And the island nation became the second largest importer of energy used, of fuel used for producing electricity. Furthermore, as research done for the National Bureau of Economic Research found, these higher prices also led to a greater rate of mortality that actually outstripped the amount of deaths from the nuclear accident. So higher electric rates are also can be deadly. And I know that seems incendiary, but that is just borne out in research. Let's see, what do I have next? Okay, yes. So this is these are the costs of new generating capacity, and this is a very important thing. And these are things that you will hear when you hear about the cost of new new generating plants. You will see that, at least I think you can see that the renewable energy sources are actually, this is called levelized cost of energy, and this is from the graph is from the solar company, but the data are from the U.S. Energy Information Administration. It's good data. The levelized cost for a new solar plant, for a new wind plant, is actually lower than for a new nuclear plant, for a new coal plant. Natural gas is actually lower than those two. But we will hear that. There are two things wrong with this graph, even though there's nothing wrong with the data. One is that for those who know the work of Friedrich Bastiat and the broken windows theory, existing capital is wealth. And the other is that for solar and wind, those are what are known as intermittent or non-dispatchable sources. Unlike gas, coal, nuclear, those sources are dependent on outside resources. They're dependent on outside forces. They are not something you can just rely on at any moment in time. It depends on if the sun is shining. It depends on if the wind is blowing, if the sun is at the right angle, if the wind is at the right speed. And because of that, those sources need backup generation to help in case they're not able to be dispatched. And those backup generation sources are invariably fossil fuel, which will be emitting, and most likely now natural gas. So the next slide will give information from the Institute for Energy Research, which looked at the levelized cost of energy from new and existing sources, and it accommodates for the need for solar and wind at the bottom, the need for a backup generation source. And as you'll see there, existing nuclear sources are by far the lowest in cost. They're about a third of building new solar and wind, but they are also lower than the others as well. And there's another, go ahead and think the next slide. There's another aspect that especially is affecting North Carolina with respect to the falling cost of solar, and that is the fact that under state law, solar facilities are granted, it originally was 15-year fixed price contracts, but now they are 10-year fixed price contracts under our interpretation of federal law from 1978. PURPA is what it's called. It's the Public Utilities Regulatory Policies Act. It's a big mouthful, and the federal government left it to the different states to decide on how to implement and interpret that. North Carolina has implemented and interpreted it in a way that's very favorable to new solar. It's one of the biggest drivers for new solar. Under PURPA, the way it's interpreted here, qualifying facilities, the public utilities have to purchase any and all power produced by a qualifying solar facility whenever it's generated, regardless of need by the utility, at the contract rate, which is set now 10 years. So what you will see with this graph, you will see the lines under each year will reflect the falling cost of solar. That is a real thing. But the little yellow dots basically represent, this is for the nation, not just for North Carolina. But the yellow dots will represent the contract rates for solar facilities and the prices that they're getting. So the utilities, if the utilities are paying more for the energy that they're getting from the solar facilities, it means that consumers are. What makes this a big deal for North Carolina is that thanks to the way that we interpret the law, North Carolina actually has 60% of the qualifying facilities in the nation for solar. So they're all here. It's a big industry in North Carolina, but they are reaping the benefits from their falling costs because of these long-term contracts that aren't revisited. Which is why, getting back to the beginning, if we replace solar the way the governor's plan has suggested, I can't see any way of doing it without increasing costs. And furthermore, I can't see any way of doing it no matter what the resource is without increasing emissions. Go ahead and, I think it's the next one. All right, this is a good graph, and I'll talk about this too before I move on. All right, but this is how electricity generation in North Carolina has changed in the last 2 decades. From the very beginning, you can see coal was about 2/3 of our generation. So that's a lot of cheap energy, but it's also a lot of emissions. Natural gas barely factored in because natural gas was very expensive. Nuclear was at 32%, and then the rest were barely featuring. By 2010, we're starting to see the effects of the revolution in natural gas recovery thanks to hydraulic fracturing, which greatly reduced the price. And so we're starting to see that work in. Coal is starting to be edged out. Nuclear has barely changed. Now, this is the most recent year that we have data. Nuclear is still constant at 32%, but we replaced that capacity. We replaced a lot of coal with natural gas. So now about 2/3 of our energy comes from zero emissions nuclear and lower emissions natural gas, and coal has been replaced. So go ahead and bump up to the next one. All right, so this is why I'm saying that we couldn't replace nuclear with even solar and wind without increasing emissions. This is something that was published in the North State Journal. It was found by my friend Dan Way. It's an application for a waiver by Duke Energy to the Division of Air Quality. They're asking for a waiver for their natural gas facility in Richmond that is backing up solar generation. The way that they are currently expected to do this backup is when solar is active, they have to cut their plant off completely. And then when the solar starts to drop back off, or if it gets really cloudy or whatever, then they have to turn their machines back on, the turbine machine back on. This is very inefficient. Anyone who operates machinery knows if you're driving a car, you're least efficient when you're starting up and driving off and braking than when you are at a cruising level and you're not touching the brakes and you're just keeping it steady state. So what Duke is asking is to keep their backup generating gas plant at a low level of operation, so the turbines are still spinning. This was going to increase emissions, but what Duke has made known is that not doing so actually leads to almost 3 times as much increased emissions. Either way, because as Duke admits, not just in here, but in emails that I should have brought that are quoted in the North State Journal, that the best case scenario, because of the added solar, is that this plant's going to increase emissions by 44%. Otherwise, it goes up by a lot more. So that's why they asked for the waiver from the Division of Air Quality. So what do I have next? All right, this is how carbon dioxide emissions have fallen in North Carolina from energy since the beginning of 2000. And as you can see the effect. And it was falling some, and some of that is from the Clean Air Act that caused scrubbing of coal plants at the beginning of the decade. But you can really see a drop off as the fracking revolution took hold and as we started adding more natural gas. It's more impressive when you consider that North Carolina has also been one of the fastest growing states in the nation. So our per capita emissions has fallen by more than half. And this is something we've seen also in the nation. The United States is one of the top emitters, but we're also now leading the world, and you can click to the next one, in cutting emissions. And this is through not just the adoption of natural gas, but also because of technological change. We've moved more and more into a more service economy. It's because of consumer preferences and efficiency gains in energy provision, efficiency gains in consuming energy in the products that consumers are buying, in your appliances, your lights. So I'm providing this because this is the sort of thing that we don't hear very much about. It seems like whenever we talk about emissions, it always comes from the perspective that we've never improved or that we start out worse and worse every year. And it's, for this nation, it's not. Now, we're still getting lapped by China and India, and their emissions are outdoing what we've been able to cut. But anyway, to me, for us, it's good news. But getting back to my main point, and what this is to say is, regardless of policy choices, I cannot see any way that we could do what the governor wants to do and phase out nuclear in any small way, replace it with anything that would not increase costs, increase unreliability, and increase emissions. So if anyone has any questions, yes. Oh yeah. Oh, that'll work.
I'm just asking for clarification. You're saying the North Carolina governor wishes to phase out nuclear power? Or
Yeah, in his clean power plan, originally there was no mention of nuclear, and it was such an oversight, and the plan attracted so much criticism that it was added for the later published document. But it was kind of downplayed, and then there was a line in there about the need to find other generation sources to replace nuclear.
So how are you going to, how does the proposal to reduce carbon emissions without nuclear, how are you going to do it? I mean, you need the electricity. It's going to come from coal. It's going to come from fossil fuels. That's not going to achieve, I guess, whatever the goal is.
I don't see how he's going to do it either. And I wrote recently about the fact that President Biden's administration is actually favoring the retention of all the existing nuclear power plants for that reason, from the environmental perspective of that's the only way he's going to be able to, President Biden is going to be able to meet his carbon reduction goals.
I have to ask you the unspoken question about the opposition to nuclear power. I mean, it's ironic that Japan has, you say, 54 nuclear power plants, which they've now shut down and are turning into a country dependent on imports, which I think, if I have read my history correctly, was one of the reasons why they were so aggressive part of World War II, but that's another story. The question about nuclear power is, when I grew up in the generation that was terrified by nuclear power because of the bomb.
Mhm.
And I think we're still reaping the results of that. The question, I think, is how do you answer critics of nuclear power that say it's unsafe, and how are you going to dispose of the waste?
Those are very good questions. For me to answer the critics, one, nuclear has an impressive, impeccable track record as far as lives lost in accidents. We know of the major ones because they are so outstanding. I mean, the 3 Mile Island is the reason why there's only one stack at Sharon Harris instead of, I believe it was supposed to be 3. And Chernobyl, of course, was the Soviets trying to weaponize a plant. And Fukushima Daiichi was also a freak accident that was compiled by human error. I don't have a good answer for the waste, except for there is very, very little waste. I wish that John Hubitz was here. I attended a talk from him where he brought out large pebbles of glass. They're about this size, and said that they would encase the spent uranium in this, and that was safe. It was very, very impressive, but I don't have that ability with me, so I don't have a good answer.
Well, regarding that, don't they use like, isn't there a new source of like, you make a salt? It's like, I can't remember, it's like well, there's thorium as a potential source, but there's also like you can make a uranium salt that produces, because there is a waste with traditional reactors. I think the traditional waste is like 90% of your mass becomes some kind of waste. But with uranium salts they've been developing, which are, potential future, if they were allow us to build future plants, would have almost no waste. And there's also, there's been tons of like great development in this area, but they just won't let a lot of people touch it. I don't know.
No, that's a good answer. Actually, the more I think about it, another way that I would go about the waste answer is to do a comparative of waste. We know about waste from coal, and the coal ash problem is a big problem in North Carolina. We know about some of the issues with natural gas, and I don't think it's as big a deal as being made out, but that's a different subject for a different talk. But disposing wind blades turns out to be an extremely difficult problem. They have to be chopped up. They're made of this super amazing fiber, which makes, which is why it can be so efficient, but at the same time, it's very, very difficult to dispose of. There are a lot of issues with solar panels, and they have a life cycle of maybe 2 decades to 25 years, at which point disposing of them will be a very big problem, and there's a lot of hazardous waste involved with those.
I'm just going to say they're also made out of petroleum products, and they require fossil fuels to be built. So all that too for the blades and the solar panels and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. He just said that he mentioned that the blades were also made of petroleum products, so that has to be considered as well. One other environmental aspect that I forgot I was going to mention, I think it's the next slide, is the footprint that these different facilities take. The largest one is hydro, and I haven't really spent much time about that, but natural gas is a very small footprint. Nuclear has a very small footprint. It takes a lot of land to place a wind facility. It takes a considerable large amount of land also to place solar. And then if you want to, I think these are, okay, it's the same power source, so it's not just the flat. So this is to power a flat screen TV by energy source. So it gives you an idea of the footprint of land that these different sources take. So there are other environmental considerations other than just emissions.
John, what about some of the costs with fracking? I mean, because you obviously have something with going on people's property sometimes, and you have to give money to people. And some of the environmental concerns with fracking too.
Okay, so yeah, he's asking about the cost of fracking, environmental considerations. So there are several with that. I think some of the things that gets lost is that a lot of this is drilling that can be a mile or more underground. I have family in Texas that gets paid by a gas company every year for the mineral rights that are never used, but it's a nice little check. I wish that I had that. But there's concerns about venting of methane that have been raised. I've looked into it. It's a big, long discussion, but a lot of the methane considerations are from places like in Dimmock, Texas, or in Colorado, or parts of Pennsylvania that are known for methane emissions. So like the famous video of someone setting their water on fire, there had been actually talks about that happening in that location from like 1930. It was just something that was intrinsic to the water there and not caused by fracking. But there is concerns. I recently read something about now there's worries about one of the chemicals being used was like PFOAs, Gen X, that type of thing, if you know what that is. But anyway. Yes.
This one. Hold on.
Okay. Anyone else have a question while he's doing technical duty?
Hello. There we go.
There we go.
Somebody who shouldn't play with knobs. So you mentioned Texas. As I recall, their grid is open, meaning the energy grid is not owned by the power generation companies. So you have the opportunity, at least in states like Texas, to choose your energy provider. Meaning if I'm willing to pay $50 more a month for solar because I'm very green or what have you, or if I want to go to the lowest cost provider, I can. Is that like a non-starter discussion in North Carolina as far as taking the grid away from Duke and some of the other companies and having that open grids?
As far as I know, politically speaking, it's a non-starter. Years ago, I teamed up with the people from NC Warren and argued for freeing up electricity, which I would thought would allow for cheaper provision, and they thought would allow for more people to choose solar, which either way, we were both happy with the thought, but just doing so really upset Duke Energy, and it hurt donations to our organization. So it's pretty much a non-starter here.
So it's
But I would
basically,
like-
the
I would
problem with
like
any
to hear
monopoly
more.
is they simply don't want to introduce competition into their market, which would, I mean, because regardless
Yeah.
of which energy source you go with in parts of this discussion, the consumers really have no leverage to participate in this at all.
No, they don't. The consumers are even left out of the process for discussing like the energy bills now. When I say energy bill, the energy legislation now, consumers are left out of that process as well. And I think, they call it a stakeholder process. And I think, we are the biggest stakeholders, but we never have a voice.
David.
Hi there. My question is, how would you recommend trying to reach out or talk to people who have sort of this irrational fear of nuclear? All they hear about is Fukushima, Chernobyl, and they think that's nuclear. It's the meltdowns because, there's a good fear campaign against it. And I'd recommend, if there are any good talking points for saying, well, yeah, like that, it's basically a media hype train of like, what do you recommend to talk to them about?
My recommendation is, may not be the best because I'm here, but, I'm still arguing for it. But I think that just reiterating the research on it, reiterating the fact that this has been operating smoothly and efficiently without troubles, talking about the promise of new nuclear generation, even though that will be much more expensive, and highlighting again the lack of emissions. So for people who are worried about that.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all very much. I really appreciate it.
I wanted to present you with a WakeLP pint glass,
All right.
and
Thank you.
absolutely see what happens when you speak at WakeLP. You get a pint
A
glass,
pint glass.
and a little gift card for you to spend wherever you want.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I'm hoping this shirt fits. It's a large.
Yeah, a large will
Or
fit
would
me.
you rather have a different size?
A large will fit.
So you see a lot of these people wearing them around here, but if you wear it, I'm going to give it to you.
I will wear it. Thank you.
We really appreciate you coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
Some of this stuff's way over my head, so I appreciate you doing the research for us. And I hope you'll come back.
No, I would love it.
And
Thank you.
You sold me today on it, so thank you so much.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
That is it. I hope that you will tip your bartender or tip the wait staff walking around. And like I said, we're here every Wednesday. Feel free to come on out and hang out with us. And that is it. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you on Wednesdays. Thank you.